All right, Dan, I'm giving you two options to pick from, so you pick the one you like best, okay? Well, hello to the Ridgeville Charge. My name is Erik Grayson. I'm the pastor of Aldersgate United Methodist Church in North Charleston, and thank you so much for having me join you in your digital revival today. Can you believe that we live in a day and time when we're having a church revival online? Things are changing so quickly, it's hard to wrap our heads around it. Things are changing like it's almost impossible to find a haircut, but you can go down to the beach now and go hang out in the surf and the sand. It's hard to know where you can go buy things that you need. Grocery stores are open, but clothing stores, I don't know. You can find bread, but you can't find toilet paper. Meat is now starting to disappear. Flour is a little bit iffy. The world keeps changing at a breakneck pace. And it's reminding us, if we ever thought there was such a thing as normal, well, that was a lie and a myth. And there's never anything that's normal at all. Life is constantly changing. Perhaps that's one of the many things we need to learn through this, is that life is going to have its changes. Life is going to move and be different from day to day, sometimes rapidly, like the world we're living in right now. When I think about rapid change, my mind goes to David in the Scriptures. I think about David in the book of 1 Samuel, particularly before David became a king. When David was a young man and was getting to know King Saul, his life was constantly changing. It's interesting, if you look and read several chapters in 1 Samuel, starting with 1 Samuel 17, read there for the next 5 or 6 chapters, you'll see a man who exhibits life under intense change. David starts out as the youngest of his brothers. He's a shepherd. He's trained to watch the flock. When Samuel comes to town to anoint one of his brothers, David isn't even invited. No one has any expectations for him. But he's soon sought after. Samuel makes them go bring him to the meal, and Samuel anoints him, saying, "You're going to be the king of Israel." The only problem was there was an already sitting king. David was able somehow to be chosen when all of his other brothers weren't, and there's a king already in place. But hey, he's been told, you are going to be the future king. You are going to lead Israel. All of a sudden, this little shepherd boy is seeing that his life is about to change dramatically. But it doesn't take effect just yet. Some time passes. There's a war with the Philistines. David's older brothers are at the front lines. David comes to visit one day, sees the giant Goliath who's threatening the armies of the Lord, and David decides, hey, I'll take him on. And David takes his smooth river stones, throws them with his slingshot, and he's able to kill the mighty warrior Goliath. Suddenly, everybody knows the name of David. All of a sudden, he's now famous. He's a celebrity. King Saul welcomes him into his inner circle, promotes him into the army, and King Saul is happy with his new poster boy, David. But it doesn't last long, because suddenly the people start chanting. Throughout Israel, they're chanting, Saul has killed his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Saul becomes jealous. He becomes so jealous that he throws his spear at David, not once but twice. David eludes it. Things are not looking so good for this young celebrity all of a sudden when the king is trying to skewer you. All of a sudden his fortunes seem to be falling just a bit. But things don't remain bad for long, or at least they don't look like they do. King Saul decides, hey, I'm going to invite you into my family. I'm going to ask you to marry my daughter. That's what he says to David. Secretly, Saul is plotting to trap him. That is an odd way to trap someone by having them marry into your family. But, that's Saul's strategy. David eventually marries not the first daughter, but the second daughter. Things are looking good, but then Saul gets jealous again, tries to skewer him with a spear again. This time, David seems to take a hint. He runs home. His wife tells him, look, you got to get out of here if you want to survive. And he flees. He flees away from his new wife, his home, and the king is trying to kill him. David is literally a fugitive. Do you see, all of a sudden, this life of this boy is going up and down in dramatic kinds of ways. He has to flee to other countries, multiple different kings, before he finally ends up in the wilderness. And in the wilderness, something really peculiar happens. All of these disaffected Israelite men come to David. They come to him, and they want to join him. You see, David has proven that he's a strong military man, and he's proven that he's a leader. And so these men who were no longer satisfied with King Saul come out into the wilderness and they join David and form an army with him. David is trying to figure out where God is leading him, where his life is going. And now he's responsible for all of these people. While he's out there in the wilderness trying to figure this out, he gets word the city of Keilah is under attack by his old enemy, the Philistines. So he goes to God and asks, God, what should I do? Should we help this city or not? And God says, yes, go and help them. So David and his army go and they defeat the Philistines. They rescue the city. And before long, though, he finds himself on the run again from Saul. Saul's army chasing David and his army. They're in the wilderness of Israel, a very mountainous, rocky kind of area, and they're literally playing cat and mouse with each other. At one instance, they're on opposite sides of the same mountain. Saul and his army, David and his army, and they never quite catch up with each other. If you've never read the Bible, it's really interesting stuff. But what we see here is that David's life is going through all of these dramatic changes. We say right now, hey, life is different. Every day is changing. We ain't got nothing on David. We might sit in our couch thinking, man, I wish I could go out to eat. Man, I wish I could go on vacation to the mountains. David is literally running for his life. But here's the interesting thing about David. David might be surviving, but he's doing more than that. David has proven himself to be a leader, to be one who cares for the downtrodden and those in trouble, and he exhibits this deep faith in God. David is not only surviving, but thriving. Throughout this whole saga of ups and downs, David shows what it is to thrive in the midst of difficulty. He's a leader, he cares for those in need, and he attends to God. He's faithful to the Lord. As I look over this story, I realize that the common foundation throughout all of it, we can see at the very beginning of this saga. We can see at the very beginning when David goes to defeat Goliath, we see the foundation for all of his faithfulness throughout this whole journey. And I love the moment where he's talking originally to King Saul. Before Saul's trying to kill him, when he's talking to King Saul, the Israelites are arrayed against the Philistines. Goliath is out there, that mighty giant. Goliath is challenging the armies of the Lord. And David goes to Saul. And David says, I'll fight him. I'll go against this giant. This giant who is threatening us. This giant who's calling us out. This giant who's humiliating us. I'll go against it. Even though the mighty warriors of Israel are lined up, they're scared to death. The professional, trained, experienced fighting men of Israel are not willing to go against the giant warrior Goliath. David is, the young shepherd boy. And he goes up to Saul and he explains that he's defended the sheep. He's defended and fought against wild animals. He can take on this giant. And how he responds is just so powerful. I love this verse in 1 Samuel 18, verse 37. This is what David says. He says this, "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." What David is saying is that, look, I've been in battles for my life before. I've fought against the wild beasts. I've been in danger. And God has delivered me every time against the lion, against the bear. And God will deliver me now. You see, what David knew is that God is faithful. God is faithful, and God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. God never changes. And David learned that he can trust in God. I believe that's why throughout this whole saga of ups and downs and rapidly changing life, that David is able to be a leader, is able to care for those in need, and is able to be faithful to what God has commanded because he trusts God and knows that God is faithful. That is the foundation. That's what undergirds him. And I believe that's what should undergird us, not only in this time, but all the time. A deep, abiding faith that God will deliver us in the ups and in the downs, because God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. God never changes. When we study the life of David, one thing that comes to mind is that David had a heart after the heart of God. That's what the Lord tells us throughout Scriptures, that David had a heart after my own heart. That's what the Lord would say. Now, David made his mistakes, but David was able to repent from them. But God was able to say he had a heart after my heart. When David was on the run from Saul in the wilderness, in those rocky crags of the desert mountain area, we remember that in that part of Israel, that in that time of his life, David wrote some of the Psalms. In particular, when he was hiding out in En-Gedi, he wrote Psalm 57, where he talks about how God is his shelter and his refuge, and how God would deliver him. Think about that. That in the moment when he's literally being hunted down by an army to kill him, David is able to pray to God, saying, God, you are my shelter. You are my refuge. You. Think about that. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. The Lord who delivered me will deliver me now. When I look at 1 Samuel 18:37, what jumps out to me is that he doesn't say, God, you kept the lion and the bear from attacking me. You kept them at bay. No, he doesn't say that. Instead, he says, Lord, you delivered me from what? Specifically from the paw. You delivered me from the paw of the lion, the paw of the bear. Think just how close you have to get if that's the part of the animal you're thinking about. If you're even close enough to think about any part of those animals, it's a problem. He doesn't say that God kept him ever from being in trouble. But he says, in the midst of those most difficult moments, when I was fighting for my life, you delivered me. In one of the most famous psalms of all, the 23rd Psalm, we hear that line, even though I walk through the darkest valley, you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. We're not promised that we won't have difficulties, that life won't change, that things won't be upside down and inside out. We're never promised that. But we're promised that God goes with us. Reminded of that old hymn, on Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. When we look at this coronavirus, this crisis that we're living in, where finances are changing, where health may be threatened, where we haven't seen our loved ones or family for months, we can take hope in the fact that God has come to us. He'll never leave us. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And as Christians, we specifically take hope in the fact that Jesus not only came into this world and experienced the ups and downs that we experience, but that he died for us to rescue us from sin and death, and that we know a salvation and a deliverance that can never be shaken, never be taken, never be destroyed, because Christ has come, and Christ will indeed come again. David is able to survive because he trusts in God, and he's able to thrive, to be a leader, to care for those in need, and to be able to exhibit his faith in God, because he's got that deep, undergirding foundation. He knows that God is faithful. I don't know if you've ever heard this expression, but it's one that's come to mind lately. Never waste a crisis. Never waste a crisis. It's one that you typically hear in terms of the business world. And we can see how that's really playing out for some businesses right now. We're in the midst of a crisis, and some businesses have found a way to make it into an opportunity. For instance, Amazon, flourishing. Chick-fil-A, they're practically printing their own money. Zoom, who even heard of Zoom 2 months ago? Now it's what everyone's using. Never waste a crisis. In other words, find the opportunity in the instability. Businesses are doing it, but I believe that's even important for us as the church to remember right here, right now. Why? Because so many people are frustrated, they're upset, they're panicking. Life is not normal to so many people right now, but we have that solid rock. We should not be shaken. We know the ground on which we can put our hope, which is Christ. So, in other words, we should be able to find a way to pivot to fulfill our mission. How can we pivot right now to change maybe some of the things we do in this world that is changing, but we can still live out our mission? to make disciples of Jesus Christ. I wonder how your churches are doing that. How can you serve hungry people around you right now who might be out of work? How can you be able to proclaim hope to people who can't come to your churches? I think your church is doing an amazing job by doing an online revival. That's creative, that's innovative. You're finding a way to pivot and yet still fulfill your mission. Never waste a crisis. I wonder not only how your churches can do that, but how you can do that as an individual. How might you be able to find a way to live out your faith in these moments? That you can be a witness in a powerful way in your community. Maybe you can secretly cut the grass for your neighbor next door, give them a surprise when they come home next. Maybe you can send gift cards to the local ER and the nurses and the doctors and just send them a note saying that God loves you and so do we. Maybe you can send something to the local children's home, or maybe to the nursing home. Never waste a crisis. In this moment, so many people are experiencing the ups and downs of life. But we who have the hope of Christ have an opportunity to magnify our witness for the gospel. We can show the world we're not merely surviving. We're not just hunkering down to get through this. But we're living into our mission. We're following our Lord and Savior. We're thriving in the midst of all the uncertainty. We're thriving because we know that the Lord who delivered us in the past will deliver us right here, right now. Recently, I came across a story that has just captivated my imagination. It's a real-life version of the Lord of the Flies. In this real-life version of the Lord of the Flies, it took place in 1966 in the kind of the Pacific Island region, where there were 6 boys at a Catholic boarding school at the capital city of Tonga. And these 6 boys at the Catholic boarding school had grown really, really bored with life at the boarding school. They didn't want to be there anymore. They were tired of it. They were tired of food. They just wanted to get away. So one day they snuck away, stole a fishing boat, and they were planning to sail off to Fiji or Australia. But in the midst of their sailing, they had hardly packed any food because they were 13 to 16-year-olds and weren't thinking. But they also were struck by a storm, and they really didn't know what to do. They ended up getting shipwrecked on a small, tiny island south of Tonga. And it was an island that had long been deserted. It had actually been deserted in the 1800s when slave traders came and took away the native population. Ever since then, people just assumed, well, it's uninhabitable. No one can really survive there. When the boys landed on this tiny island, they did 2 things that were incredibly remarkable. First, they started holding daily prayers. These were Christian boys. They grew up in a Catholic boarding school. They started holding daily prayer with each other. How remarkable is that? 13 to 16-year-olds every day coming together to pray before God. And the other thing they did was they made a pact right at the beginning to say, we will not quarrel with each other. We're not going to fight. We're not going to be divided in this moment. We have to be living not just for ourselves, but we have to live for each other. As they began living on the island, life was tough. At first, they really struggled to find enough food. They were having to eat whatever fish they could catch and birds they could kill, and fresh water was a particular problem at first. And so they had to end up drinking the blood of the birds that they'd catch. It was really difficult. But over time, they began to scale further and further up the mountain of this little island. It was rocky, it was cliff-covered, and as they went up, they eventually discovered at the top of the island the leftover inhabitants from the natives that had been shipped off years before. And in their inhabitant kind of area, they discovered chickens. The natives had chickens that were now running free over the island. So once they discovered the chickens, they were doing much better. Sometime after they were shipwrecked there, a fisherman began to sail past the island, and on his binoculars he noticed something strange about the island. He noticed that it looked like there had been fires on the island. And he thought, that's strange because in these islands, there's not spontaneous fire. That's really rare. And then in his binoculars, he saw one of the boys, completely naked, hair down to his shoulders, and before long, the boy noticed him in the boat. The boy scrambled down the cliffs, jumped into the water, and before no time, the strong swimmer made it to the boat. And when the boy arrived at the boat, he, in perfect English, said, "Hey, I'm Stephen. There are 6 of us stranded here, and we reckon we've been here about 15 months. The boys were rescued from their island. They were taken back to the mainland, reunited with their families. You can imagine the kind of celebration they had. The doctors examined them, and the doctors marveled at what kind of superb physical condition they were in. Their muscles were taut. They were healthy. They were lean. They were doing quite well for the ordeal that they had experienced. And I'm just reminded of those 2 things, their daily prayers and their pact never to quarrel with each other. They not only survived, they were thriving. Brothers and sisters, in the midst of this pandemic, the world needs a faithful witness of the church to show what it means to have hope in dark days, to show what it means to believe in a God who never changes. Even though the world around us is rocking and reeling, we know the Lord who stays the same. I want to invite you, if you're struggling during this season, maybe with anxiety or questions or uncertainty, I want to invite you to find time each day to practice your own daily prayers. And in that time of daily prayers, I want to encourage you to do 2 things. First, take time to remember and thank God for all the ways in your past He has delivered you. Thank Him for that, whether it's relational, financial, out of a job situation, a difficult moment. Take time to thank Him for His deliverance in the past, and remember that the same God who delivered you then is the same God at work in your life now. The second thing I want to invite you to do is to spend time in the Psalms. Spend time in those prayers that David wrote, praying over how God might deliver you, how God goes with you. Spend time praising the Lord through those words that have been used by the saints throughout the ages in their moments of elation and their moments of difficulty. Use the prayers of God's people. Brothers and sisters, I believe that we have our moment to be like David. Even though the winds are howling, the waters are raging, the life around us is changing, I believe that we can be like David. We can be steadfast. We can care even for other people. We can be faithful to the Lord and can be leaders in the faith because we know the God who is the same yesterday, today, and forever. May the words of David become your words, that the God who has delivered me in the past will deliver me now. May you go in peace. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.